Uhuru, and welcome to episode 2 of the One Africa Worldview podcast. My name is Soliana Raquel. I am the managing editor of the Worldview newspaper, the official organ of the African People's Socialist Party.
Uhuru comrades, Uhuru Sasa. I'm Jaina Villamumba, here inviting you to the African People's Socialist Party, of which I am the Southern Regional Representative.
Hello, comrades. I'm Dr. Mariah, Promotions Manager and Volunteer at Black Power 96 Radio, bringing the voice of our community to this panel and helping to amplify the ongoing resistance of the African working class.
Tune into the One Africa Worldview podcast, the weekly news podcast of Burning Spear Media, airing on the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel, bringing you news and analysis that you won't find anywhere else. This is through the African internationalist perspective that sees the world through the eyes of the African working class and understands that the unity and organization of the dispersed African nation is what will resolve the everyday oppressions caused by the colonial mode of production. This is the world economic system that functions and prospers on the backs of African and all colonized people's labor. So with that, please hit that like button and help us to overcome the shadow banning that revolutionary African voices face. Share this show with your friends and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We have about 13,000 subscribers so far, so please help us get to 15,000 this month. We start with our Whirlwind weekly update, discussing the top news headlines of the week, then head into our primary objective, which is the main topic of our show. We'll then transition to For the Culture, where we'll continue the discussion around the film Sinners, addressing pressing political concerns about director Ryan Coogler. Today, we're dealing with some heavy topics that you just can't seem to escape. So that's right, we're going to touch on cases like Diddy's and Shannon Sharp's, our social media timelines, broadcasts on CNN, and even documentaries on Prime and Hulu are really just shoving this in our faces. And we understand that sensationalized news headlines assault the consciousness of the African nation, with polarizing narratives developing that aim to divide African people, especially between men and women. We understand that the colonizer state apparatus, including their media machine, aims to absolve its own crimes and make African men the poster children for colonial violence. But we here want to set the record straight, giving these cases a much needed African internationalist analysis and the way forward. So today we do this with a very special guest who's been on the move for the past 3 weeks, first in Cuba, then in Washington, D.C., and then just this past weekend in Philly. We have for you guys President Yejide Mila of the African National Women's Organization. So be sure to stay tuned. But before we get into all of that, let's review some of the news that has happened this past week. Rep. Janaba, do you want to kick us off with what we have first?
Uhuru, yeah, let's go ahead. This weekend is May 25th, African Liberation Day, and it's a huge deal, especially because we have the honor of celebrating African Liberation Day as members of the African People's Socialist Party all over the world, so stay tuned for the announcements. But it's a very important day today because today is actually Malcolm X's birthday, as well as the late Vietnamese president, revolutionary Ho Chi Minh. And both of them were inspired by Marcus Garvey, and we are the 21st century Garveyites. And they would be 100 years old. So I believe that's called centenarians, I believe that's what it's called.
Yep.
So here we have a clip of Chairman Omali Shatella, who's actually our direct leadership, and he's speaking more on the significance of Malcolm X way back in 1995. So check this out.
So about 1963, this is really important. 1963, Malcolm X, after the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Malcolm X made a speech in New York City. He said, Kennedy, who he called an old fox, right? He called Kennedy a fox because he said, in reality, there's no difference between a Democrat and a Dixiecrat. He said, one, in the South, what you got is a wolf. In the North, what you got is a fox. He said both of them are members of the canine family, right? And he called Kennedy that old fox, talking about Kennedy. And he said, Kennedy, he's the one with the CIA in Vietnam right now. Before anybody was talking about Vietnam, Malcolm X was talking about Vietnam. He was holding up Vietnam. He was holding this even Steve.
Uhuru.
Mariah, we can hear you.
North St. Louis that were devastated by at least one severe tornado in Friday, May 16, 2025. The National Weather Service, NWS, said that they believe that the tornado was an EF3 with winds between 100 and 165 miles an hour and was up to even a mile wide at times. And more than 80,000 buildings remain without power, and without a death toll has already reached 21. Entire roofs were ripped off of the houses and other forms of property damage, including the Black Power blueprint properties and the Who movement personal homes even. The concentration of this devastation is actually in the Northside African community, and it's the Who movement that's declaring to bring power back to North St. Louis through Black community self-determination. You can help fund this emergency relief efforts at blackpowerblueprint.org/Northside Disaster Relief Fund.
Wow, thank you so much for that update, Mariah. Yes, go ahead and visit that link to make sure you help the comrades out there. So yes, another thing that happened this past few weeks, and as I mentioned briefly earlier, our president Yejide had recently come back from a trip to Cuba as part of the LA Hands Off Cuba Committee, where she represented the African People's Socialist Party. This delegation brought with them over $500,000 worth of medical supplies, as well as revolutionary solidarity to the Cuban people. Here, along with her cohorts, President Yejide saw firsthand not only a society under siege by U.S. imperialism, but a people transformed by revolution, a people determined to defend their hard-won freedom. And she also wrote a great article about this for our June edition of the Burning Spear newspaper. So make sure you are subscribed to the Spear at theburningspear.com/subscribe to go ahead and get this and many other great analyses on world events. But let's go ahead and play this clip from Cuba that Yejide had shared with us.
Uhuru, comrades, I think that the clip just stopped, but in addition to the Cuba trip, and I'm really excited to hear more about that, I think it's important that we do go back and address the tornado that struck in St. Louis, because it's extremely significant, and I think that the clip should definitely be played. So if we had that, and again, the state, always has all of these disaster relief efforts in place for places within the white community. But when you look at the African community, we're always left behind. So having the African People's Socialist Party there through the form of the Black Power Blueprint, through the form of all of the other economic institutions, we are putting dual and contending power down. We are replacing the state, completely negating their presence, and we're going to have disaster preparedness for ourselves. Is there a way we can play that clip from the St. Louis tornado? Wow, wow, wow. First of all, that looked incredible. It looked like we already got the disaster relief efforts, and not to mention just the beauty of the actual grounds. But it made me think about Mother's Day, and I want to address this. Just that while colonial capitalism is literally attempting to squeeze every last drop of every last dollar out of the African community, on Mother's Day, I mean, there's like a record-breaking almost $36 billion that people are spending exchanging colonial loot in the form of flowers or in the form of, chocolates from Africa or in the form of jewelry that comes from colonial states. We in the African People's Socialist Party, and with the leadership under President Yejide, who's going to be on the call shortly, hundreds of Black mothers and fathers and families were converging on the White House for the 4th annual Black Mothers March. And we're going to watch this bold protest demanding an end to the state-sanctioned kidnapping of African children throughout the U.S. through this child welfare system, or so-called welfare system. So let's play the clip. Voodoo. Guru, that's how we celebrate.
Uhuru. And what many are calling a fiery symbol of justice, the infamous Nottoway Plantation in White Castle, Louisiana, once the largest plantation in the South and a monument to that brutal legacy of slavery, has burned to the ground. And this mansion, long promoted as a luxury resort and wedding venue, was built by enslaved Africans and stood for generations as a shrine to white wealth built on Black suffering.
There's just so much happening in the country and, even around the world. And I just appreciate both of you for just taking us through the, recent events. And, this podcast, the product of Burning Spirit TV, brings context and clarity to world events, focus on the perspective of. So we really do want to ask you to go ahead and, subscribe, and let's get this channel to 15,000 subscribers. And, we have a few minutes before our next segment. So let's just go ahead and chat a little bit about this. I, just based on the update that Mariah just gave us, particularly, about the plantation burning down. I don't know if folks have gotten a chance to see like how mainstream news has been covering this, how bourgeois news has been covering this, but they've been, covering it in a way where it's almost like they're lamenting the fact that this happened, right? They use these like euphemistic phrases talking about, the sprawling antebellum mansion, this, historical, architectural marvel that, that represents our history sort of thing. Like, we're talking about a plantation, and this is a sugar plantation, no less, right? This is, if we know our history, they're one of the worst kinds of plantation. And don't get me wrong, any plantation is horrible, but sugar plantations, namely, were known for how brutal they were, and how African people were either like dying by the hundreds on these plantations or were getting maimed for life, right? And so I think that's really important to know, and that's why we say burn baby burn, right? And it's also interesting because if you also look at a lot of like U.S. history courses, you'll not really talk about how sugar plantations were existed in Louisiana and Mississippi. Like usually when we talk about sugar plantations, they're talked about in the context of the Caribbean or Brazil, but the U.S. definitely played a role in that. And so I think it's just a really important thing that happened. And I just, want to appreciate Mariah for bringing that up. But yeah, Carmaz, are there any other comments on some of the things that we saw?
Yeah, Uhuru. I do. I want to kind of comment on that also. As far as that plantation, like we said, that was the largest of the plantations, and that symbolism of seeing it come down, and how you said just some of the mainstream media and some of the social media of African people everywhere, African people from Louisiana all the way to to Ghana, African people that are celebrating this brick by brick. This was built on Black blood, and seeing this come down, and just seeing like there was pictures of just beautiful gowns that Black women are having on African women standing in front of this burning structure, and just seeing that's so powerful, and just seeing that turn, that okay, something that I saw that this place was making 2.7 million or more a year on just as a wedding venue, throwing birthday parties, so still on Black capital, black labor, and still making money there. So just seeing this come down, oh, it's so powerful. It's definitely powerful.
Right. Yeah, her comrades. I really want to speak to this whole thing, the whole question of, in North America, plantations and colonial plantations being, essentially sacred ground in the South, right? You have this question of white nationalist Southern heritage. You have, this essentially this torture, this structure look just like the White House, you know what I mean? And it's the largest plantation. What does that really mean in terms of production? This isn't, it isn't, it is a issue that, there are weddings that happen at this place. And so this is essentially sacred ground to white people. But to me, it's the equivalent of getting married at Auschwitz. You know what I mean? And so, looking at it from an African or through a colonial lens. And when we talk about, this large plantation, I'm talking about an economic system that was developed on the plantation. And I think Sinners highlighted that as well. And we'll talk more about that in the cultural aspect, but in the for the culture segment. But we're talking about having wooden coins, their own economic system. A lot of these plantations had, where they didn't even get paid dollars. They got paid whatever the market was, because the plantation had their own market. And so their entire lives is woven into this plantation. And I saw a viral clip. I know time's running low, but there's a viral clip of a tour that was being held. And it was this white, lily white, as we call it, woman giving a tour, talking about the history of how so much better Africans are treated here. They had a roof on their shack, and then made the statement that some of the Africans who were enslaved when it was first being built was still enslaved to that day, even during the burning. And so, when we see that, we don't see, we out there like the rest of the Africans taking selfies, and we out there singing the roof is on fire. We don't need no water. Let that mother burn, baby, burn.
Thank you for that vocal, comrade. But yes, you're absolutely right. And we're, again, this is us seeing history through the African working class. And when you see the history through the African working class, this is the kind of conclusions that you reach, right? This travesty of a building burning is a victory for us. It is cause for celebration, not cause for lamentation. So yes, thank you so much for that. So yeah, we are at 5:20. So let's go ahead and move to the primary objective of our podcast. Our episode is titled Black Women in the Fight to Smash Colonial Violence, which we've discussed up to now in our weekly updates.
Yeah, here, Comrade Soliana. At the center of all of these updates is none other than our incredible guest for today, including my leadership in the African National Women's Organization. She is the president of the African National Women's Organization and a leading member of the African People's Socialist Party. And I'm extremely excited.
What a fierce African revolutionary, and organizing African women under the banner of African International joins us today to talk about what the way forward must be for our Black women and men, especially at a time where the colonizer attempts to divide us with issues like the one surrounding Sean Diddy Combs.
Yes, so please welcome President Yejide, and thank you for joining us on episode 2 of the One Africa Worldview podcast. I think it would be, we're just so excited to have you, honestly, and I think it would be really important to start this discussion with, you giving us, a quick summary about, who you are, what ANWO is, the African National Women's Organization, why it exists, and what sets it apart from other organizations that consider themselves, as champions for women's causes. Before you do all that, you can go ahead and introduce yourself, though. Take your time.
On this podcast. I'm so can you hear me okay? Okay, it says that the host muted me. Oh, unmuted me. Never mind. I spelled it wrong. Um, but I'm so happy to be on this podcast with you and to see all of your bright, smiling faces. I am Yejide, as comrades have already introduced, and we have our own little show too called The Breakdown. So people are familiar, but I'm the president of the African National Women's Organization, which is an organization that was founded by the party, the African People's Socialist Party, in 2015 to address the special oppression of African women as a result of colonialism and to bring African women into revolutionary political life. Why is that different from any other organization? First of all, I don't know of any African women's organization out there. There may be African led women organizations around multiple issues, but there is not one that I'm aware of that is doing the kind of organizing and work that we are doing. And I mean anywhere in the world, right? Um, and what sets us apart is the question of colonialism and that we are a part of a revolutionary strategy to destroy the colonial mode of production. And what's central to that is the question of African women. We believe and we know, I mean, if we can just look at our community as just a bite sized segment of the entire African nation, well, African women represent nearly, if not half, of all of Africans in the world. Okay, so it behooves us to want to organize these people because we are half of the fighting force that is needed in order to destroy and bring down the colonialism. So when we have that huge task upon us to help bring African women to the right side of the question, to help them understand what the contradiction is and how we can win so that we can end all of these attacks that are happening to us. So yeah, that's the short answer.
Oh, comrade. I should say president, comrade president. Chairman writes, we want an end to the political and social oppression and economic exploitation of African women, and we believe in the absolute, unequivocal political, social, and economic equality of African women and men. So as African women, we know and experience this special oppression, and most of us have been taught that it's the patriarchy, or that there's something wrong with African men, or some absurd statements like African men are the new white men, or trying to be the white men of the Black African community. Can you provide us some clarity on this briefly?
Yeah, thank you. We always have to attack this question of patriarchy anytime that it rears its ugly head, right? Like, so we recognize that patriarchy, which is the dominance, men dominating women, is a contradiction that exists throughout the world, and we know that this exists in all kinds of communities. However, we recognize also that it's a symptom of the core contradiction, which is colonialism. And we also recognize that patriarchy as an idea was born out of the white worldview, colonial feminist worldview, that men are the primary opposers of the forward movement and progression of society and of women. And that's just not how we see things. We have to be able to recognize that colonialism is the primary contradiction that we must face. And when we hear things like black men or like the white people of the black community, it just reflects a deep misunderstanding of colonial domination. Like it redirects our rage and things that we should be fighting for away from the colonial state, but onto our brothers, right? Like it who are also colonized right alongside us. So it's like we are absolved as African women from the effects of colonialism, and it's all on African men. Like they're the ones who carry weight and they haven't been able to escape it, but African women somehow have, and then these men are just, symptoms of it. That's just not the case. We are all experiencing colonialism at the same time. And one of the contradictions that have seeped into our community from being colonized and domestically colonized is one of violence and other things that are carried out again from one gender to the other. But we must, you know, deal with those internal contradictions, and we do that through uh, uh, discussion, explanation. We can solve these problems amongst each other one way, by hook or by crook. But fundamentally, the system itself has to be destroyed in order for it to really be resolved for good. Under capitalism, which is an exploitative, oppressive system, you're not going to find the path forward to end these sort of things that impact women, and there's not going to be any systems that are going to be put in place to ensure that women are staying safe. So we look at colonial capitalism as the primary contradiction. So, like, in underneath this, like, we can't say patriarchy and black men benefit from patriarchy either, because they don't control the economy, they don't control the courts, they don't control the police, so they don't govern the lives of the people, and they're not the ones removing African children from our homes and dictating the terms about our labor and things like that. So while it may be true in many instances that black men are oppressors, um, in our homes most likely. The reality is that there's we are living within a system that is oppressive in and of itself. So even if we can solve these problems amongst ourselves, black women and black men, we made a deal and we're good. We still living under a system that presses down with all of the things that will continue to duplicate in our communities. So unless we destroy that colonialism, then we're not going to really deal with that question of contradictions that keeps rearing its ugly head underneath the banner of patriarchy.
That ugly head, that's definitely a point there. Now, that under that contradiction and under that colonial that colonialism there, looking at the Diddy trial, um, where those arguments they started on May 12th actually of this month, and that rapper we know that was indicted on, let's see, on 5 criminal counts of what is it, racketeering, prostitution, sex trafficking. And I mean, we've seen this happening. We've seen this happening over and over and over in these past couple of years. And really, like, I mean, African men. We can say R. Kelly, we can say Bill Cosby, Jonathan Majors recently. I mean, it's all over with the media coverage. You see it, we all see it. But in that whole contradiction and this destructive and clearly attempts to reinforce that narrative that African men in particular.
Right, and it's not as though, the US Department of Justice, the courts, the presiding judges, the state, has some like moral disagreement, right, with drugs, rape, human trafficking, abuse, all of these things, right? There wouldn't be an America today without the perpetration of all of these things, and it's no secret about what goes on in the entertainment industry, which is a whole process built up from theft and exploitation, right? That's what made that possible. So President Yejide, can you give us some analysis around all of this? Like, what's important that we understand about these cases in the context of, like you said, what we call this colonial mode of production, like touching on how, the contradiction of how the colonial state be the legitimate and legal moral authority on these issues.
Yeah, that's always a iffy one, I think, in terms of like answering, because we know that people want vengeance, because they've seen video evidence in many cases of violence conducted against a woman or whatever, and evidence of these so-called, these criminality, right? And but we also know that the colonial state is illegitimate. It's not the judge jury of African people, and just to reinforce what I said earlier, like the whole thing has to be destroyed in order for there to be a fair trial for Puffy. You know what I mean? And for all the other people, so that the people who are making it known about their opinions online and things like that could be the actual jury for these people. But I think overall, black men, the high profile cases that we're seeing are always black men, despite the fact that the most pervasive ones were Harvey Weinstein and some other people like that, with millions controlling the movie industry and things like that, who you don't even hear a peep out of. But it's Bill Cosby, it's Sean Puffy Combs, it's some of the other people that you mentioned. So now the face of rape, the face of abuse, the face of exploitation are Black men, and that is not a coincidence. I'm not saying that they are absolved for any horrible things that they have done. I have my personal feelings about it, and which are basically aligned with many people who are saying that something should be done about these people. I find it horrific, many of the things that they are doing. But the fundamental thing is that Puffy came up in an industry, thrived in an industry that was filled with exploitation and violence and oppression. We live in an economy. We live in a community. We live in a social system that is built on crime. It was built on genocide, built on rape, built on slavery, built on exploitation. So every single thing that comes out of this system has the stain of that on it, including an industry that has robbed African people of their culture, that utilizes our culture for their to make millions for non-African people who exploit their workers in terms of like musicians. And Puppy was a part of that. It's a part of that. But the thing is that the system, like we're not going to make the face of rape and oppression and violence against women, Black men. We're just not going to do it. We're just not going to do it. When we're there was a time at some point to attribute the face of rape to Black men on the continent of Africa. Oh, Congo was the worst place, that the most dangerous place for African women. South Africa is the most dangerous place for women in the world. And if these are the places that are most dangerous for women, then that means that the most dangerous people on the face of the planet are Black men. And we're just not going to do that. We're not going to allow for this disgusting growth to place now, to trade, to make now the oppressed, the colonized, the abused African working class people, and he's not working class, but abused African people be now the face of violence where they have control over and can control the narrative. We're not going to do that. There must be some accountability that is being held. And I think there's a lot of situations that come out of the Diddy trial and some other things that we hear stories about people who were around and things like that. And there must be a call. There must be a responsibility taken from African men, African women, um, and, and and all of these things that we must say. When we see it, we got to say something and we got to intervene. And that's the only way that it's going to stop it or minimize it. When you're dealing with people who might need some money and they might turn the other way because of that exploitative nature of it. Um, and we're not going to um, allow for the colonial state to create or to control that narrative, and to make and because it's all the Black men, Jonathan Majors, Bill Cosby, R. Kelly, Puffy. We just can't do it. And so we as African people have to hold them accountable. And when we're in it and around it, we must say something in that moment. We must protect each other in that moment, right? We must deal with people in that moment. But there was just too much, not none of that. And so now we're allowing for the colonial state to be the judge and the storyteller of this story. We did not protect Cassie. We didn't protect the other people, right? Like, so how are we then going to change how we interact with one another? That's where it starts. But fundamentally, we ain't going to allow for the colonial state to be the person that's going to say what's right and wrong, particularly when it comes to African people and especially when they're the purveyors of rape and genocide and violence and things like that.
Uhuru, very powerful. And, it makes me think, especially how important it is to discuss the way forward in these situations. President Yejide, you just concluded the Black Mothers March on the White House this past Mother's Day. And you raised up the fact that the state kidnaps our children every day, and no one is on trial for that.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do as African people in our communities to put an end to colonial violence, whether it's expressed as chairman states vertically or horizontally. And maybe you could touch on what that means as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've been, the African National Women's Organization has had our Arrest CPS campaign since 2017. So we've had different iterations of how we deal with it, right? We've been direct advocates. We've been, right now we're in the season of doing political education in our communities and trying to change the narrative amongst our community. And I think what we should all understand, what I want people to leave this with, which is the basis for the Black Mothers March, is that Child Protective Services does not protect children. It definitely does not protect African children. Families protect African children. And allowing or allowing the state to a certain degree to control the narrative against a mother who may be struggling, parents who may be struggling, to now allow them to intervene in a way. And I've seen this whereby we stand by and say, well, we're going to call the state on you to take these children and things like that. So what the community can do is stand up against that narrative, right? It can stand by the side, no matter what kind of problems you have with the people in your community. If you love the children and you want to see them safe, the community is the thing that holds the children safe, right? Not a state institution. We used to, Black people was in the houses of white people, nursing their kids, taking care of their babies. Where was our children? They wasn't more concerned about what was going on with our children. Our children was at home. They was running the streets. They were doing whatever. They was with grandma, whomever. They didn't care about the welfare of our children or anything like that, right? But as soon as the emergence of the Black liberation struggles of the 1960s and 70s emerged, and these state institutions come in, and guess what they target? Our community. So we should see this as a colonial attack against the Black family, against Black people, against Black women, because if you deal with the question of women and families, you are striking the core, the center of community. You're splitting it up. If you make families divide against one another, communities divide against one another because they care so much about the children who are our future, then it's really going to be a divisive thing. It's like it explodes like a bomb that you drop in the middle of a household. So what communities and what people and what individuals can do is you take that responsibility on yourself. Even if you can't do it the entire time, we solve these problems. We figure it out. We get with our neighbors, we get with whoever, and we talk about these children and what we can do to minimize their impact, their contact with the state. We do not want children to go into the clutches of the colonial state in foster care or anything like that. We have the ability to do it because our children are not safe. They're not safe. And mothers are being criminalized too. So it's a pathway to prison and jails for families and mothers as well.
Uhuru. So incredible. And it makes me think about, even the question, of the state and its relationship to African women, and the question of Fannie Lou Hamer, and getting the Mississippi that's like where they sterilized this African woman without her knowing, and it was such a common thing for white men to just take your uterus out, that they called it like like getting your appendix removed. I don't know what the actual term is, but it's something that was common. And it makes me think about Desi Woods, having to fight for her life when a man was trying to rape her. And it makes me reflect on just who we are as the African People's Socialist Party, and the 14-point platform, and how that addresses the question of just every question in the African community.
Right, and I appreciate you raising that too, right? I think point 9 of the 14-point platform, specifically talking about, the oppression of African women. There is no, liberation for African people if we're not dealing with this question, right? And Yejide, you touch on this really well on the article that you submitted for the Spear for our May edition. I believe it was titled "The Global Exploitation and Revolutionary Potential of African Women's Labor," really going into how the oppression of African women is sort of at the center of all of these, different oppressions that we see, and how you even touch on like the different sectors of African women's commerce and how the state, disrupts that and sort of takes African women's, own ability and power away. And this is also directly tied to what and you also spoke about this at your great keynote presentation at our Philly market, where you talked about how CPS is also this, right, it's not just taking a child away and so the parents suffer, right? This is a ripple effect. It touches all of the levels of the family and the community, and it's so destructive to the African way of life and to the way that African families are put together, right? And so I just really wanted to just mention that, and the sort of really important work that the African National Women's Organization is doing, and just dealing with these really real material questions that African women face under the system. And yeah, I just want to give you the chance to just talk a little bit about the sort of ideas that inform your work, whether it be through the Huru Kijiji childcare, whether it be through decolonize, all of these things that ANWO undertakes in this effort to address African women's special oppression.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think the real struggle, the real fight is the war of ideas, especially among African women, because we have to get past this thought that if African women achieve a certain level, a certain stature in society, that somehow we have broken through this paper, glass, steel ceiling and we've made it, or this is somebody that we need to look up to. But as people who want the world to change, wants to transform society, we have to look at the works of these women. We have to look at who they represent. It's not just the fact that they are a woman or in the so-called oppressed identity, one of the oppressed identities. It's what have they done? And it's so important in our work to really get this across to African women that we have to get free. And just having a black face in a high place ain't gonna help us get free. We've had black faces in high places since we got out of slavery in the U.S. in the official form, and the conditions of African people have not changed. Right in Rwanda, which the U.S. imperialism likes to tote as one of the bastions of women in parliament. They have half of their parliament is African women. But in Rwanda, the conditions of African women are poor. You know what I'm saying? So we have to address this question of class, and we have to address what we are, and a lot of that is going to be done through the process of waging fierce political education campaigns and really dealing with the hardcore questions. And sometimes we may be even seen as haters, like you hating. Supposed to be a women's organization, but you hating on, like, girl, I don't hate Asada. I do not hate Harriet. I don't hate me. You know what I'm saying? But I do hate a backwater sellout coon woman, let me tell you, and she does not escape the criticism of the African revolutionary that's trying to change the world for the betterment of African women. So that's part of in everything that we do. And the question of class also comes into that question of CPS. Well, what's going to happen to those poor children over there? They this idea that the poor, so the people who don't have education or something like that, is the victims, and they have to be saved from these belligerent ghetto moms or whatever. That's also a question of class, because we see that sometimes when we go to people and talk to them about it in church and other kinds of things. So this is a pervasive thing that needs to be dealt with amongst African women. We have to be engaged in a lot of discourse and political struggle, and we have to always center the primary question, which is to destroy colonial mode of production, all of the oppressive systems, and then we'll deal with everything as they come to us, because we will have the power of the African working class instead of the power of the colonizer bourgeoisie. So yeah, that's what I was saying.
Right, exactly. This is such a great discussion. I'm really glad that you were here to bring science into it, to bring theory into it, and also obviously it's really important for us to really intervene on issues like these, because the colonizer is working to sell us their narrative. And we see all of these counterproductive conclusions that people come to without the benefit of leadership from their own revolutionary party. And so we just want to go ahead and make sure people know, again, African National Women's Organization is become a member at ANWOUhuru.org. That's ANWOUHURU.org. And you can support their economic work by shopping with decolonize.com, a revolution for your hair and body with body butters, salves, face scrubs, and more. And I can attest to that personally. Okay, real oil, liberation, hydration mist are like my go-tos. Okay, these dreads aren't this long for no reason. All right, so tap into decolonize. And so thank you again so much, President Yejide, for being on with us. And feel free to join us as we transition to our next piece for the culture, where we'll once again discuss the film Sinners. So thank you so much, Comrade Yejide. And I will go ahead and hand it off to my co-host, Rep. Janaba.
Yeah, let's go ahead and continue our conversation on the film Sinners this week, because there were some viewers, we just didn't have a lot of time, and there were some viewers who had some really important questions, and they raised some really important struggles that we want to take some time and really dig into. Last week, Comrade Jarabu on YouTube raised some concerns that we were falling for Kugler's propaganda, and we didn't discuss some of Kugler's political contradictions, so we do want to make sure we take the time to get into that. We also had a question from Comrade Kenya about the question of the Asian community during that time period, where when the film was situated or set. But we should start off with the Jarabu's criticism, and I'll preface by saying that we are African internationalists first and foremost, and we recognize that this film and most expressions of pop or popular culture under the colonial mode of production is not going to convey an African internationalist worldview. But you know, we do want to recognize the attempts that are made by these forces to respond to the political period we're in. They're forced to, just as the United States was forced to put Barack Obama in your face, because you know, it's colonial capitalism is always trying to shift to make sure that they can maintain domination. And so, as you know, most of these, in terms of this political period that we're in, most of these forces have removed themselves socially from the African working class. Ryan Coogler himself, it's like a Spike Lee question. You know what I mean? They make great films, but you know, this isn't going to free us. So as the anti-colonial struggle intensifies, their relevance depends on their ability to speak. Hollywood has to speak to the conditions of our people. You know, back in the day, they could drop Birth of a Nation, you know, and with a setting like Gone in the Wind with that plantation that burned down, you know, in the background. But it's not the same today. So these forces are not, and they should not be regarded as leaders over our struggle just because they produce, like what they produce speaks to the conditions that we're facing. We know that it's, you know, it's satisfying to be able to see these types of characters that take on the colonizer without remorse, because we're so used to seeing Africans, you know, bit hunched over like Quasimodo every time that a white person steps into the frame. But it's not the same as Coogler committing class suicide and joining the anti-colonial struggle. So Sinners isn't calling on anyone to join into a revolutionary organization to take on the real life parasite, the real life vampire that exists outside the movie theater, is probably sitting inside the theater next to you. So we're not wrapped up in the whole propaganda. You know what I'm saying? We recognize as African internationalists that Coogler drew his inspiration for this film from the real life history and the conditions of African people, and that our liberation struggle is forcing these types of expressions to even come out in the first place. And you got to remember, Ryan Coogler was selected. This African man is from Oakland. He's from Oakland, California. He talks often about, you know, the presence of the African liberation movement as shaping his worldviews. So, but it was the same as Spike Lee. Spike Lee had the traditional African experience up in New York. You know, that doesn't mean that the conditions are going to change because he dropped a hot film. And so for those who don't know, Coogler was responsible for the Marvel Black Panther film, which were some of the most counter-revolutionary U.S. propaganda. The Oakland-born Killmonger is the villain, and the imaginary Wakanda and its leadership buries its head in the sand while Africa and the dispersed African nation is under attack. How can there be a Wakanda existing? And what are they doing? Watching the ships on the radars with vibranium as they transport the neighboring Africans to, or their Africans, to wherever the hell they're dropping us off at. So, not to mention the whole CIA gets to play the good guys in the thing. So Sinners does not become a redemption film for Coogler's, essentially his assault on the Black liberation, the African liberation movement. But we should observe the tone of this latest film, compare it to that film series, and measure it alongside the developments that are actually happening in the real world. And most of what we're seeing is that he's drawing from true African colonial experiences to propel African dollars, and it is working. So with that time left, let's go ahead and address Comrade Kenya's question about, and it's a perfect day. Ho Chi Minh and Malcolm X's birthday on the same day. We get to address the Asian community as it relates to the Asian colonized community as it relates to the African colonized community in that time period. Does anybody, I've spoken enough, does anybody want to say anything to that?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you so much for just clarifying our position on that whole, Ryan Coogler situation. We're not, buying into the propaganda, right? We're just recognizing what this, what the production of this film is saying about what African people are feeling and doing right now, and how pop culture, even Hollywood pop culture, can't ignore what's happening on the ground, right? That's what we're saying, and that's the lens through which we're looking at this development. But to address the question that Kenya raised, I really didn't know about this history until after watching the film and doing some research. But there actually was a pretty strong Chinese community in the Mississippi Delta in the 1930s. I read this old 2017 NPR piece that talked about how the first wave of Chinese immigrants actually came to the Mississippi Delta soon after the Civil War, and they continued to do so up until the 1900s. And they opened businesses like grocery stores in the African communities in the Delta, and that's how we see the characters where the twins go to get all the things that they need to set up the juke joint. So there actually was historical basis for having those Asian working class Asian characters in the movie, and then so it's not really a logical stretch to see that in the movie these two Chinese characters would have come to the juke joint, would have had some sort of social relationship with African people there. And it says a lot about too, what kind of, because again, we're probably going to spoil a little bit, but we see them sort of fight side by side, right, at the juke joint when the vampires come and knocking. And so there's also something to be said about this sort of solidarity that might have existed there too, because they were both facing an existential crisis in the form of vampires, but they would have also faced it in a more, non-supernatural sense as not being, white North Americans in the Mississippi Delta during the 1930s, right? So it was interesting to see that there was actual historical basis for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's significant too, because I see a lot of, the Africans are raising the issue. Well, the Asian person in the movie ruined it, and see, that's why you can't let anybody in solidarity and things like that. And so we really have to address that question as well. Yejide, I see you have a face.
Did you want to say something?
I just finished reading a book that basically it's about Lumumba and his murder and the sister that was a part of his camp that helped him navigate in the transition. And she said one of the most dangerous things against Africa are African people. She said because they betray the revolution, but she didn't have the class analysis, but she was like, they betray the revolution at all instances. So the petty bourgeoisie is dangerous. So I'm saying that in saying that we can't we have to take, if somebody's down for the revolution, I don't know if this is in the film, if they're down to fight and can fight with us, to free for our position, right? Let's do it. But like, if we looking for enemies in other nationalities, we have to first deal with that stuff inside. The brother right next to you might be the one that sell you out, as we've seen so often in history, with African leaders who are eking self-determination for themselves. And again, I don't know how this relates to the film. I have not watched it, but I was just reacting to that statement, which can be true, but also it can be true too that within the entire African nation, we have to always deal with the enemies that seek to protect the oppressor and sacrifice the long-term aims of freedom to sidle up with or get bitten by the vampire, so to speak.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Comrade President Yejide, for that. So we're a little bit over time, but we'll go ahead and just wrap up our discussion on sinners, and move on to our announcements. Comrade Mariah.
Definitely want to recognize our powerful team that produces the One Africa Worldview podcast. And of course, our host, Soliana Geneba, along with myself, our researchers and our headline writers, our editors, our engineer, and our special guest for this week, President Yejide. And we are accepting new volunteers to join our team. Join the war of ideas and make your voice heard. Sign up over there at theburningspear.com/volunteer. And just looking ahead at some of the events here, we have our Uhuru Planet Reparations Apparel is an institution of Black Star Industries under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Our mission is to forward the culture of white reparations to African people, and our sales sustain the work of the Black-led community programs of the Uhuru movement. We have almost 40 designs promoting reparations to African people and anti-colonial struggle. Check out our full inventory here at uhuruplanet.com/t-shirts. And we are actually currently seeking new designs for the classic slogan, Uhuru means freedom. And this is an exciting opportunity to contribute your art skills to the African liberation movement. The winning design will actually be featured as a new product in our shop and will contribute to the liberated African working class-led economy that Black Star Industries is building all over the world to continue the legacy of Marcus Garvey and put power back in the hands of the African working class. And the deadline to submit that over there is Friday, May 23rd at 11:59. So for questions, you can email info@uhuruplanet.com. And from Oakland to Palestine, colonialism must go. Solidarity with African and oppressed people. And you can join us Tuesday to Thursday, May 20th to 22nd, 2025 for events in Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose for a discussion featuring Penny Hess, African People's Solidarity Committee Chair, author of Overturning the Culture of Violence and one of the Uhuru Three, addressing anti-colonial free speech and why we must unite under the leadership of the African working class-led Uhuru movement as part of the worldwide struggle to overturn colonialism. And this is presented by the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. We will be at the Naibo Proctor Markets Library, 6501 Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, California on Tuesday, May 20th at 6:30 p.m. and that specific time. And on Wednesday, May 21st from 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific, we'll be at Mercury Cafe located over at 201 Octavia Street, San Francisco, California. And on Thursday, May 22nd from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., we will be at the San Jose Peace and Justice Center at 48 South 7th Street, number 101 in San Jose, California. And this time, till it's won. Forward to African Liberation Day 2025, Saturday, May 24th from 1 to 6 p.m. Pacific at World Beat Center located at 2100 Park Boulevard in San Diego, California. And the Black community and all who believe in justice are invited to come on out and spend a day listening to great culture, dynamic presentations, eating delicious food, and learning more about African history and just how we get involved in the struggle for our own liberation. You can contact West at apspuhuru.org. That's West at apspuhuru.org. And all of the other upcoming events, make sure you go over and check out the burningspear.com/events. And that calendar there, that'll list all of the stuff that we have going on.
Uhuru, thank you so much for those announcements, Comrade Mariah, and thank you so much for all of you who have tuned in. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join us again on One Africa Worldview next week at 5 p.m. Eastern on the Burning Spear TV YouTube and Burning Spear Media Rumble channels. One Africa, one nation. Uhuru.